All right, folks. So, as promised, this is going to be the instructional video that explains to you basically how to do the part of the breeches we didn't get to at the workshop. Um, so we're going to talk about the lower bit of the leg here. So we're gonna put the lining pieces in, and we're going to attach the knee band. So you can see I've made myself sort of a little bit of a lower leg dicky here. This would be the front panel. You'll be able to know the front panel because it has a single hash mark on it. This is the back panel. You'll know it because it has two hash marks on it. You should also be able to recognize the two different shapes as well, which will match up with the kits that you guys have. Obviously, yours would be sort of sewn, on the out seam, which would be up here, until you reach that point at which the legs open for the buttons and the buttonholes to function. I figured for the purposes of this instructional video, it might be better if I just left that unsewn so that we left everything good and flat and you could actually see what was going on here. So the first thing that we need to do before we think about attaching a knee band is we need to put a lining piece over here on this side. You'll notice on the front side, we do have the seam allowance pressed under. If you remember, we did talk about that in the workshop. That's what makes that nice clean edge going down the leading edge of the buttonholes here. On the back panel, we have left it raw, and this would be appropriate for wool. We don't need to do any finishing here, and this would be where the buttons are. So because this is kersey wool and it's pretty hefty, there's really no need to put any buckram in here, and I'm not going to do that in the video, just to save us some time. If you really wanted to put buckram in, it's not going to hurt anything at all. You would just put a piece of buckram between the wool and the bit of linen lining that I'm going to demonstrate here today. If you're going to make breeches again in the future, let's say out of linen, or a super fine broadcloth, or something like cotton or silk that's even more difficult to work with, you would absolutely want to put the layer of buckram in, for sure, for the added structure, and gives a little more bite whenever you start working buttonholes. Gives the buttonhole stitch something to bite into more, and would help prevent the buttons themselves from ripping out on the backside when you cord them through. But on the kersey, it's not really necessary. So I've already sort of prepped the linen pieces here, but you'll put a linen piece in on the leading edge of the leg here, and you do want it to overlap the fold under from the wool edge, and you do want it to run fairly close to the edge. Let's say within 1/8 of an inch or so. It doesn't have to be all that accurate per se, but you want it to be fairly close. You don't want it going all the way up to the edge, and you don't want it sitting back too far. You'll notice this piece here kind of comes over top of the sort of cutout here. We're not going to worry about that. We'll talk about what we do with that when we actually put the knee band on. It's not something we're going to stress about. But we're gonna put this piece on here. Now I've already folded it under, but you can see all the edges of the linen get folded under and pressed. And the first step to securing this thing down is we want to baste it in place, so it doesn't move around. Now this is not a kind of a crazy job. We're just going to do a few stitches from the bottom going up to the top, just to anchor it in place and prevent it from moving around on us too much. And every single time I make one of these videos, we get a thread knot, like right in the beginning. Isn't that wonderful? And again, the basting thread is not playing nice today. There we go. Now, when you pull this basting thread, you don't want to be pulling it where it starts tugging on anything in the length. You just want each one of these stitches to be anchoring the linen piece in place, where we don't really want we don't want to crunch it up like so. Now, if you really wanted to, you could run another line of basting around the edge, you know, so that the edges were really anchored in place and weren't going to move around. For the for this kind of lining, it's kind of a dirty, ugly lining. We're not going to worry about that so much. But if we were working on something nicer, we might make the effort to do that. We're going to do the same thing with the back. We're just going to place the piece in. And you can see this piece is shaped into the sort of buckle guard, and that's what we want. Again, all the edges are folded under and pressed so that they hold their shape. Oh boy, we're having all kinds of troubles tonight. Okay. All right, so there we are. We got these pieces basted in. Now, how do we actually set them in? So we set them in with the whip stitch going all the way around. I'm going to be doing that in this sort of green thread here because it's what I have next to me. I would recommend that you either use a color matching thread or natural thread for this. So we're just going to start the needle in, and we're just going to whip stitch around. Now, this whip stitch, we don't necessarily want it to go all the way through the layers like we did the waistband. We could do that here on the finished edge, on the sort of folded over wool edge where the buttonholes are going to be. And that will help secure that folded edge. But the rest of this, we do not want the whip stitch to go all the way through to the front. We don't really want to see the stitching, frankly. You know, it may be a little unavoidable until you get a feel for the needlework here, but you just want to catch some of the threads once we get to the past this leading edge, so the stitching doesn't show all the way through. And I'll kind of demonstrate that when we get there. But let me get this leading edge taken care of first. And then as we get across the top, I'll have a chance to show you what I'm talking about, as far as not stitching all the way through to the front. But this part here, the rolled over edge on the front panel, this is being done exactly in the same way that we talked about doing the lining and the waistbands at the workshop. So it's sort of a whip stitch and a prick stitch all in one, which helps secure that front edge from rolling over. All right, so you can see how the front edge was done, and I don't know if you can really see the stitching or not. Once we get this pressed, that should stand out, but you can see it all down there, and you can see basically how far back the lining's been set. Now, across the top, like I said, we don't want the stitching to go all the way through, so you're just going to grab a few of the threads in the fabric and whip stitch, but this is not going to go through to the front, or at least we're going to attempt to not. You know, you're going to get a few stitches that that do anyways, but the idea is to not have that. We're just securing the lining kind of from flapping around. Don't forget that, the lining will be also secured by either the buttonhole stitch or the buttons being corded on the back. So here you can see we don't have any stitching showing at all. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to finish setting these in off camera, and then when we come back, they'll be set in and we can talk about the next step. So be right back with you. Okay, well, welcome back. So as you can see, we've got the lining pieces put in here. So kind of bring this up here. You can see they're just whip stitched around and held into place that way. Now you can see down here where the weird little notch was, I just kind of cut the excess off. Leave that raw, don't worry about it. This is going to get caught into the knee band when we get there. So that's our lining pieces put in. Like I said, important to remember that on the front panel side, you're going to be working the buttonholes through this. So this whip stitching on the outside won't be the only thing that's holding it in place. And likewise on the back, you'll have the buttons that get corded through, so they'll be held into place when you stitch the cording down. So now at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to flip this over and we're going to work from the front. Okay, so we're going to start talking about the knee band here. So same thing as on the back, 2 hash marks, back panel 1 hash mark, front panel, just to help keep things straightened out here. Now, first thing to notice, you can kind of see that stitching from holding the lining down. It's not visible from the front, as discussed. We also have some of the mark stitching here, which we talked about in the workshop. So this is marking out the line where the buttons will sit whenever we attach the buttons, right? So, when our front panel and our back panel go to close, we'll have the sort of setback from the edge before the buttonhole starts, and then that should line up with where these buttons are, right? And that just gives us a way to kind of keep track of things there. So that's why mark stitching's nice, right? The chalk line is basically gone just from me handling this for a few minutes, but the mark stitching line is still there. So we're going to talk about the knee band here. Now we have a seam allowance of 1/2 inch that we added to this, right? So your bottom edge should look something like this, right? That should be what we got. Back panel curves up, right, to get into the knee. Front panel curves down to get over the knee. Now, when I cut the dicky out, I did not cut any seam allowance, basically just because I didn't want to waste the time to add it. So if the proportions of this look a little off, it's probably much smaller than the leg you're working with, because I didn't add seam allowances anywhere. But that a smaller seam is better for a demonstration, because it means we can kind of get through it in a reasonable amount of time. Now, before you guys left the workshop, I gave you some instructions on measurements for cutting the knee band. So that should have given you more than enough cloth to follow the instructions that I'm going to give you tonight. So measuring for our knee band. What we're going to do is we're going to start measuring from this point right here on the back panel, where the sort of buckle guard starts hanging down. And we're going to measure straight along here, along the curve, okay, all the way up to the side seam. And you can see that that's 5 inches. So we're going to make note of 5 inches. Then what we're going to do from that side seam, we're going to take our tape and we're going to measure straight over to where the tabby is on the front panel. We're not going to follow the curve here. We're going to measure straight. And we should get 10.5 inches. You can see that there. We're about 10.5 inches. Now, the reason we measured that straight is the curve down in the front on the front panel is not actually for us to make a curve. It's actually for us to make a bubble. So on the back, we want the knee band to sit flat, because that curve is doing the exact job that we want. It's reducing shape, and it's gonna sit so that when we bend our knee has somewhere to go and it's not rubbing. But on the front, we need somewhere for the cloth to stretch, right? Because as our knee articulates, right, like a knuckle on your finger, right, it pushes out. So we need some extra fabric up in the front. So that's what the curve's actually going to do. So we're going to set the knee band in straight on the front. And you see what happens whenever I push that curve up into a straight. You see how it makes a bubble. Well, that bubble is exactly what we want to set into the knee band, which means that we need this distance to be a straight distance, which means that this seam is going to be longer than the seam it's going into. So we're going to have to ease that in, and that will permanently make that bubble. And then when we go to iron it, if you remember when we talked about ironing at the workshop, we talked about there really being two things that we do. We stretch cloth, and we do what's commonly called shrinking cloth, but we're not really shrinking it because the cloth won't shrink. We're going to be compressing it. And this is going to be one of those compressions that we do. And we'll talk about that when we get there. So we need that 10.5 inches, right? It was 5 inches from here. And then we got out to 10.5 on this stretch, right? So 10.5 in length we need. Then we need a certain amount to go from the tabby over to hold our buckle. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And we need a certain amount to go from the front tabby to make the sort of tail that will lace through the buckle, right? So on the back side here, we want our knee band buckle to sit more or less in line with the buttons. More or less. A little back is sometimes seen as well. We want it to be under the guard so it's not rubbing against our stocking. So we don't want it like way out here onto the front panel. We don't want it sitting all the way back here because that would just look ridiculous. So we want it more or less in line with the buttons, which should be about a 2-inch extension. A knee band buckle, if you've never seen one before, this is what it is. It's got, a center bar, and it should have 2 or 3 teeth on it, sometimes just 1 tooth. And on the back side, there'll be this sort of T-shaped thing. This T-shaped thing sits in a buttonhole that you sew on the knee band. You just kind of put it in the buttonhole, and then it's held in there like that. So the buckle itself has a certain amount of extension because of this piece here. So it should be about 2 inches. Some of you guys with the larger size patterns, it might be a little bit more, but that's easy enough to measure. Now for lacing through the buckle on the front panel, you'll need about 4 inches. So take our 10.5 inches, add 2 inches to this side and 4 inches to that side, and that's the total length of cloth that we need cut. And we want that cloth to be 3 inches wide. So here is our knee band, okay? Now you can see when I line this up on the back panel, we have that hangover. And we have to imagine that, we'll be set back 3/8, half of an inch to sew the buttonhole where the buckle will go. And if we lay the buckle down, we can kind of see how that's going to line up. And same thing on the front. We line this up and we can see that we're going to have plenty enough to lace through the buckle. So not a big deal. If you're not totally confident with this measurement in the front, longer is better. We can always trim it back. Not a big deal. Okay, so setting this thing in. We're going to start at the edge of the tab on the back panel. And we're going to line this thing up with our 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now again, we're working from the right side of the cloth here, from the front of the cloth, because we're going to sew this in, and then it's going to get rolled down. And when it gets rolled down, it's going to make that nice clean seam that we want. So line this up, and we'll use a few pins just to kind of hold it in place, and we'll ultimately end up basting this into shape. But this needs to sit nice and flat along the back, which is going to be a little awkward to do because of the curve, okay? But when we roll it forward and we press it, it will stretch into shape. Again, we talked about stretching at the workshop, so that shouldn't be a terribly new technique, but we'll demonstrate it here when we get there. So we're going to throw some pins in, but we're also going to base this thing in just to make sure that it kind of stays put on us and isn't shifting around, and that will help it hold its shape a little bit more. So we want to baste pretty close to the actual sew seam. Doesn't really matter if you go above or below. I'm just going below because it allows me to line the edges up easier with my thumb and finger, and that allows me to make sure I'm getting the shape put in here correctly. You can see I'm doing a relatively small baste as far as basting is concerned, because again, I want to really hold the shape in here. That's what I'm concerned with. And we can't do that with big old stitches. All right, you may notice we've jumped forward a little bit here. What happened while I was working on the back section of the leg is we had a little bit of a camera hiccup. So I continued to work while the camera did not continue to film. Fortunately, I noticed this before we got really to a point where we needed to continue our instruction. So shouldn't really be a problem for us here. So what happened off film, I think the camera died right when we were basting the seam into the back panel. So what I've done since then is I used a back stitch, as you can see here, and I've put the panel into place, sewing up to the side seam of the leg and stopping at that point. Then all I did was I pressed this off in this shape right here, like we talked about at the workshop, you know, pressing the seams flat before we open them up. So I did that, and it helped put some of the shape into the back curve here, the recessed curve. So that's all that really happened off camera. I figured it wasn't really worth me pulling all this out and showing it to you again on camera, because you're all smart enough to figure out what happened there. So let's go ahead and focus on the front panel now, because this is where things are a little bit different. So if you remember on the back panel, we described that this just gets set in sort of as it is, right? You pull the seam along, you baste it in place there, and you sew it down. Now the front's going to be a little bit different. So the front, we need the knee band itself to go in straight, okay? And we need the little curve that's here on the front panel to actually get sewn in straight. And you can see what happens when we push that seam straight. It sort of starts to form this little bubble here, right? And that little bubble is going to make the pocket that allows our knee to have room to articulate, right? So if you use your finger like a knee, you know, as you bend it, you can see how it sort of pushes forward like that. That's what this does. This little pocket gives you just enough extra fabric there to allow the knee to articulate without it being too much of an issue. Let me see if I can bring you guys down a little bit closer here to see. Well, looks like that's as close as we get. All right. Anyway, so how do we achieve this? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a measurement from the side seam straight over to sort of the edge where the tab is here, right? Just take a straight edge right over, and you can see that that's 5.5 inches. Now, if we measured along the curve, it would be longer. So we want the measurement to be straight. So it's 5.5 inches. And then we mark that out on our knee band here, right? From the side seam forward 5.5 inches. Then we also find the center point of the distance between here and here, that 5 inches, and we find the same center point here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the knee band and we're going to line it up to being, you know, where we made those marks. And now you can see the knee band's pulled a little tighter than than underneath, and that's what we want. We want the knee band to be a little bit tighter, because that's gonna make that shape happen. And then we're gonna line up those two center points, and we're gonna pin those off. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do our best to sort of take the excess here, the ease, and divvy it up in the middle. And the same thing over here. We're gonna divvy it up in the middle and throw a pin in. And now you can see our knee band's been put in a straight line, which means that curve has been pushed up into the straight line. And just like before, we are going to baste this in place. Now we're going to do a slightly different basting here though. We're going to kind of do a reverse baste, and that's because this baste is just a little bit stronger than the normal running stitch baste. And you'll see how this is done in a moment. And we need it to be a little bit stronger because of the shape that we put in here. We don't want the shape to move around. So once we get the edge here sort of tacked off, using your finger on the back side, you can see there's these little ripples here on the back side. They may not come through in the camera, but you'll certainly be able to feel them. Maybe you can kind of see them like that. There's some ripples there. You want to use your finger to sort of flatten those out and distribute that as even as possible, and then take the stitch back like so. You see what that did? Made sort of a loop, and we'll do it again. We're going to do this all the way across. And again, we're doing this because the stitch itself is a little bit stronger than the forward baste. Each stitch that you take here, making these sort of reverse loops, actually sort of locks itself into place. So we shouldn't have too much shifting around, which is what we're looking for. Not shifting around. There we go. So we're all basted in. We can take the pins out now. We don't need them. And you can see what that did. You can see this thing won't even lay flat now. It just has shape put into it. And that is exactly what we're looking for, because we need shape for the front of the leg so the knee can work, right? So now what we're going to do is we're just going to back stitch this whole thing in place on our seam allowance. So we'll just start where we finished before. We'll go ahead and do a back stitch, and it's going to be the same thing as before. It's going to be about 6 or 8 inches, 6 or 8 stitches per inch. Half-inch seam allowance, as we discussed. Now, a perfectly reasonable alternative to the half-inch seam allowance down here at the bottom of the leg would be 1/4 of an inch. There's plenty of originals that show smaller seams like that. It would be totally reasonable to choose to do one of those instead, but for simplicity's sake, on your kits, it's been made 1/2 of an inch, just so that you can focus on making clothes and not necessarily focusing on what seam allowances go where, and why you might choose different seam allowances in different areas. Those are all lessons for another day. The whole point of this really was just to learn to put the garment together, right? And how all the pieces work together, so we can save some of the more complicated stuff for future lessons. But here we go. We're going to sew right along here, making that back stitch. And when we get done, we'll take the basting out, and then I will show you what we do from here. So at this stage, I'm going to go ahead and finish sewing this in. And when the camera comes back, we'll talk about the next steps. So see you in a moment. Okay, so what we've done now is we've finished the back stitch on the front panel, and we've removed the basting. And I can see our knee band's got all kinds of twists and stuff going on in it. And the reason for that is all the shape that's been sewn into this. So now we're going to press this thing open. So briefly, just to kind of walk you through what I did in the back, this is easier whenever the front isn't sewn in. So we're just going to kind of pull it up out of the way. But all I did in the back was was kind of press along the curve like so, and kind of just lightly mold the fabric into the shape that's going on in the back. Okay, that's all we did in the back. Now for the front, you know, we're going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to get it so it's straight. Okay, we're gonna press that so it's straight, just like so. Okay, and that's it. And we're gonna let it cool off a little bit. You get our friend the clapper here to help us with that. All right. So now we're all pressed nice and flat. I know that the flap's kind of blocking what's going on with the seam here, but that's really okay because we don't have anything happening in the seam. So if we roll the knee band down a little bit here, I want to show you, we put this in 3 dimensions. You see how it makes that bubble, and there's just shape here. You'll see this on yours for sure because it just doesn't lay flat, and that's really what we're going for here. Now yours may not be as dramatically seen because, you know, your legs will be sewn together and we're sort of working with this thing being butterflied, but you know, that's all fine. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to take our shears, okay, and up against the tabs here, okay, this tab and the front tab, we're going to snip these open up to the seam. Okay, so can you see what I did there? We just snipped it up to the seam, and the reason we have to do that is we're gonna press the leg open. Okay, so we need to get that out of the way. So we're gonna do the same thing on the front. Now be careful, don't do this, you know, up and beyond the seam. Just up to the seam. Okay. And now we want to press the seam open, like so. Okay. We want to get it pressed open. Now this is maybe a little tricky on a flat board. You would probably be better off using something like a sleeve board to do this. I'm going to do it on the flat board here so you can continue to, you know, see what I'm doing on the camera. But just know that it would probably be easier with like a sleeve board. So we're going to start in the center. Now, if you're using a steam iron, like I am, remember that the steam, the heat in the steam, is what breaks down those hydrogen bonds, right? And it's heat and pressure that will actually change the shape. So you want to use enough steam to really do what you're trying to do, but then let the iron work. If you're using a dry iron, you would wet this or wet a press cloth and then, you know, put the iron down, and the wet cloth will make the steam. And we talked about all that at the workshop. But just remember. Okay, now let's go ahead and move this tabby up out of the way. We're going to go ahead and just kind of pin it out of the way. So we're on the rear panel now. We're going to move the tabby out of the way. Now you can see we have this excess bit, right, that we've sewn on. So we want this to be rolled over the 1/2 inch also and pressed down. Okay, so let's go ahead and take care of that. All right. And a clapper, once again, will be our friend here. And we're going to do the same thing on the front panel. We're going to get this out of the way. And we want this to be folded over 1/2 inch. All right, there we are. So now our knee band is on, okay? and we have the excess that we need back here for the buckle, and we have the excess we need on the front to lace that buckle. So now what do we do? We're going to take the knee band itself now, okay, and put the tabs to the front for the moment. They will be behind the knee band when we're done, but for the moment, we're going to put them to the front. And the knee band is going to get folded in half. All along the seam allowance, okay? We're going to match it up to the seam allowance, like so. So we're going to need to put a few pins in just to hold it. So it's just going up to the edge of that seam allowance, okay? Just like so. And if we flip it over to the front, you should see that we're now starting to have the formations of a knee band. And it should be something about an inch or so, right? All right, so working back to the back. We are now going to baste all of this in place, sort of per our usual arrangement, and then I'll show you how we attach this, okay? So again, we're only working on the part of the knee band that's in the seam. Don't worry about the extra tabbies right now. We'll address those when we get to them, but we are not there yet. So just go ahead and baste all of this into place. Again, relatively close up to the edge. The edge is going to be where we're working. What we're ultimately going to end up doing here is whip stitching this thing in place. So we're going to do that all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that. And when we come back, we'll be ready for the next stage. So I'll see you all in a moment. All right, so it's all basted in. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a whip stitch. So we're going to start over by the tabby, not actually into the flat bit yet, but we're going to whip stitch this knee band down to the inside of the leg. Now, what we don't want to do with the whip stitch is go all the way through to the front of the cloth. We just want to anchor it down. So we're going to kind of just catch to the middle of the cloth. Some of your stitches you're probably inevitably going to end up going through to the front, and that's fine because you should be using color matched thread anyways. But this won't be the only stitch that holds this knee band in place, so you don't necessarily need to be worried about its strength. We're just kind of anchoring it into shape and covering up the seam allowance. So just go ahead and all the way along do these whip stitches. As you can see, we're just whip stitching along the top, and we're trying to avoid catching through to the front. Now some of these stitches have, and that's fine, because I'm not taking a lot of time to prevent that, but you want to avoid that as much as possible. If you're working on something like linen or silk, where this wouldn't necessarily be an option, this step you would skip, and you would end up just doing the stitch that I'm going to show you after this. You sometimes see this on originals, and you sometimes don't, basically. Alternatively, you could just whip stitch this to the seam allowance itself. That's an option as well. Doesn't really matter, just so long as this is all kind of held in place. So we're going to finish along here, doing this whip stitch, and then that'll allow us to take our basting out, and we can start to press this knee band into its final shape, so that we can then do the finishing stitching on it. This is not an area of the garment where you need to spend a lot of time. It's never going to be seen. And again, this isn't the only stitch that's going to hold this in place, so you can really just blast through this. Let me get to the end, we'll knot it off. Okay, so now that's all whip stitched in, right? Inevitably, we've caught some of the stitches along to the front, but the idea was we wanted to avoid that as much as possible. Which you should be able to do, because you'll be taking a little bit better care than I was right there, because I'm just trying to show you the technique. So let's go ahead and thread up the needle again, and we'll get ready for the next part here. So at this stage, we are going to go ahead and take this basting out, and we're going to press this thing off. And we're going to do that from the front. And the reason we're going to do it from the front is that we want to make sure our finished knee band looks correct, right? It should all be about an inch, because that's what we were aiming for. So normally we would do heavy pressing from the inside. So if we did end up glazing the fabric, you wouldn't see it. But in this particular case, we're going to do it from the outside, which means that we have to exercise some care. So I'll show you this here in a moment. My iron has a little foot guard on it, which helps prevent that glazing. So I don't always need to use a press cloth, but we can show you a press cloth here. So we're going to move the band out in front of the tabbies. Now there's going to be some trimming that we have to do on these tabbies, because we have this bit, right, that isn't in the seam. So the first thing we need to do is just do our best to get that little excess to lay good on the tabbies. Okay. You can see how this is looking like a knee band now, right? So we could iron this flat, you know, but we're not going to. We are going to use a ham. Now, if you've never seen a ham, it's called a ham because, well, it looks like ham, but it's this thing. It's a round pressing tool. Now, why are we going to use this? We're going to use this because legs aren't flat in real life, right? They're in a curve. So we're going to press this thing on the curve. And we're going to kind of start almost in the middle, right there, because it will establish our width here that will match all the way through. Now, talking about my iron, you can see on the bottom of my iron I have this foot, and that's what prevents that glazing. But if you don't have something like that, you absolutely want to use a press cloth. And all you're going to do is put the cloth down over top of whatever it is you're pressing, and then you can press, and it should help prevent any of that glazing that could happen. Now, glazing, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, this is when after you iron something, you may notice you put a sheen on it. You could probably even see it on my ham. You see the ham's been pretty well glazed. Matter of fact, this is sometimes intentionally done, right? When we make fabric, linings, for example, right? You've probably seen like glazed shalloon, or it's done with a heat treatment. But when we don't want it, we don't want it. So you have to guard yourself against it. So basically you need a, you need some kind of barrier that helps dissipate some of that heat so you don't end up glazing. And we're just going to do this all the way along using the ham. And just pressing our knee band flat. Now when we get to the tabbies, again, we need to be careful that these are sitting correctly. So you have to do a little bit of fiddling here to get this to sit the way we want it, which is fine. And that's pretty good right there. And now you can see that if we carry this shape through to match everything else, which we want to do, we might have to trim some off. Which is not a problem. There we go. Now we'll start working through the front. You just got to take your time with this. Taking your time with this will be helpful to you in the future, for sure. Okay. Now, there's a little bit of excess stuff that we have. Not a big deal. We're just going to trim it out. So anywhere that it is, we will simply get rid of it. And we want to trim this back to being even with the knee band itself. So like so. And the leading edge here, don't worry about, because we're gonna round that off when we're done. And we're gonna do the same thing on the back here. All right. Trim that excess off. And we'll go clean this up too. All right. All right, so let's talk about what we are going to do now. So now working from the front, okay, you can, this is our, if our knee band was closed up, right? We're on the proper side of the garment here. This is our knee pocket. This is the bit that comes up in the back, right? So, right, 2 lines for the back, 1 line for the front, right? So working on the proper side, what we're going to do now is we're going to run a prick stitch above the seam. And this is going to catch all the way through the layers here, and it's going going to help hold everything together, okay? So it's going to be just above that seam, if you can see it there, right? So prick stitch is the stitch where your needle will go behind where you came out and then you move forward, but we're not butting these up against each other like a back stitch. But the reason we put the needle behind where you came out rather than in front of it is it sort of like that basting stitch I showed you before. It locks each stitch in place. When you're just doing a normal running stitch, you know, forward in, forward in, forward in, as you keep pulling, you can actually over tension at the back versus the front. With this, each stitch is locked, which kind of makes each stitch individual as you're working along here. And also I find that you have better control over the size of the stitch. It's a lot easier to get a smaller stitch, which you can kind of see there. So we're going to do this all the way along. And we are going through all of the layers while we're doing this. So if I show you the back, you can see where the stitching is, right? So this is also holding that knee band in place. But you can see how far above. It's not very far. And we are just going to continue along the whole seam. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I'm going to finish this portion. And when I get to the end of this portion, we'll talk about what we're doing with the rest of this, okay? So be with you in one moment. All right, so we're back now. That stitching has been finished all the way along the top here, and we went ahead and just gave it kind of a quick press. And you can see on the back side, it is stitched all the way through all the layers. So what that does is it really anchors that knee band into place, so it's not likely to separate from the garment itself. Now we want to actually lock the shape of this thing in. So we're going to start with the front panel tab, and I like to round these off. They're not always rounded off on originals, but I like the look of it. And you just kind of eyeball this. It's really not a big deal. It just kind of, see, that's it. Just kind of give it a little bit of a rounded off shape. All right. And we're just gonna kind of throw a pin in there for now, just to kind of keep it where it is. You can play around with that as much as you want, to make it as clean as you want. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sew from the top of this tab here all the way around the edge, and all the way along the bottom edge. And same thing on the back, up to the tab. And then we're going to stop. Now, some breeches do have the stitching going all the way across the top below the seam. You can do that if you want to. You do see it. I'm not going to be doing that because it's just not necessary for what we're doing here. And then we will put an additional row of stitching in the middle here on the front tab, just to really make some structure for this thing as it, you know, works through the buckle. On the back, we won't do that because you would actually have a buttonhole here, which we'll talk about when we get there. So we're going to go ahead and thread up a needle. And again, I'm using natural thread because it's what I have an abundance of, and it's sort of next to me here. You should be using color matching thread for this. Probably should have just used some wild colors so you could really see what's going on, but you're all smart enough to know what we're doing here. So you see how this works here, and I'll demonstrate it a little bit, and then we'll cut the camera out. Now we're gonna make a decision here. So on this front edge that we just rounded off, we can either just do the prick stitch around the round edge, or we could do a buttonhole stitch around the outside. You kind of see both. Techniques. We'll do the buttonhole stitch just so you can see what that looks like, but just note that you don't really have to do that. You see both things. So just like before, we're doing a doing a prick stitch. It's going through all the layers. And it's doing that because we want to solidify the shape here. We don't want our knee band to be all rolling around, curving over and looking all sloppy. Once you get up to the point where your finger can hold that tip together, just go ahead and remove that pin. All right. So now we're up. Now we're up to the edge, right? So we're gonna bring our needle up to the top, and we're just gonna do a buttonhole stitch, you know, across here. So like I showed you at the workshop, right? Needle goes through clockwise. The thread from the eye end gets pulled around, and then go ahead and seat the purl down. And this should be fairly tight. So you're making a protected edge here along the front. So as you use this tab in and out of a brass buckle, or whatever metal it's made out of, it doesn't shred apart, basically, is the idea here. So you can see how that's working. And again, this won't be as dramatic looking and color matching thread. And you can make the stitches smaller than this, it's not a problem. What is a problem is whatever the hell just happened here. All right. Technical issues. Sorry, I gotta pull this off camera and get it up by my face so I can see what's going on. All right. Probably gonna need to go slow while doing this. Linen thread in particular, once it starts twisting up, kind of becomes a bit of a nightmare to work with. You could do the same thing when we get to the rear tab. And do this buttonhole stitch over the raw edge, but I never do. Since it's not an edge that like gets worked at all, I don't worry about it. All right, and then we're gonna get the needle to go from underneath, come right back to the top. And you can see we've put that reinforcing on there. And now along the whole bottom edge, we're gonna do our prick stitch. And this is really gonna define the bottom edge of the knee band. And it makes it look rather nice, actually. So just all the way along the bottom, okay? Going through both layers down here, make a nice crisp edge is what we're going for. You can kind of see the difference between where the stitching is and where it isn't. It really cleans that up. Now I am going to encourage you to work with the work in your hand, and kind of in a curve, right? Because it's going to be worn that way. So sew it that way. Sew it in a curve. Don't sew this flat down on the table. You know, get all the all of it real flat, and then we're going to wear it bent, because the stitching will end up being a little tight. Probably not something you'd ever really notice. It won't necessarily have a visual effect, but it certainly will have an effect on the longevity of the garment when the threads just live super tight all the time, right? We don't want to do that. But this is it. We're going to just keep all the way along the bottom, doing our prick stitch. Okay. So just all on the bottom, we're going to keep doing that. So I will cut the camera here, and I'll bring you back when we're working up at the back tab. All right, so I'll see you in a bit. All right, so we are all the way down here at the rear tab. So sort of as we discussed before, a couple options here. You could do that buttonhole stitch across the raw edge like you did on the front. You could just whip stitch this, or you could just kind of carry on with the prick stitch. I'm just going to carry on with the prick stitch here. It's not something that gets a lot of wear, unlike the front. You know, the front getting laced in and out of that buckle all the time. You could get it chewed up pretty good. Back here, it's not really what's going to happen. It's just going to exist, sort of. So I just carry on with the prick stitch like that. The cloth can handle the raw edge. And we finish off our prick stitch across the top of the tabby here, just up to where it attaches to the main body again, and then we're going to stop. And we will talk about what happens from this point. We're nearly there. Not much left to do. Just needle all the way in. And we'll go ahead and knot it off. All right. So now we have that stitching done all the way across the bottom of our knee band. So where do we go from here? What happens now? Well, we're going to turn our attention back to the front real quick. Because this front tab here gets a lot of wear being laced in and out of the buckle, we want to add a little bit of reinforcement there. So what we do is at the point at which it sort of breaks away from the main body, we do another row of stitching using the same prick stitch, just right in the middle, and again through all the layers. And when you do this on yours, you'll see how this really helps make this tab quite a bit more rigid. With all the layers that aren't free flowing. Now you can do what I'm doing, and you can, sort of eyeball center, or you could actually mark out a chalk line here and make center happen that way. Entirely up to you. If you're making maybe a nicer pair of breeches than what we've been working on here together, maybe I would do that. Okay, so how do we finish off here though at the front, right? We don't want the knot to be sort of exposed. So we're going to push the needle through to the back side, okay? And then we're going to bury the needle in the middle, and we're going to come out. So we're not stitching all the way through to the front. Then we're going to put the needle just behind where we came out, bury it in, come up, bury the needle in, and come up, right? And so none of that went through to the front at all. But that's not going to go anywhere now. And we don't have a knot up here to get caught on anything. Okay, so once again, we will go ahead and we'll give everything a press. And we'll use our hand for that. And then we'll get these finished off. On the back tab, you will at some point have to work a buttonhole in here to hold that buckle, and it will be something like in this location. Okay, you work a buttonhole there, and that allows you to put that buckle in. Remember we looked at the buckle and you saw how the shape of it. I put the buckle away. I'm sorry I don't have it handy right now, but you saw it earlier in the video. And it just sits in the buckle. It sits in the buttonhole. The little T-shaped part of the buckle goes in there. So now basically the only thing we have left to worry about is the fact that these two tabbies sort of float around aimlessly, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to anchor them to the tabbies. Now there's a couple different ways you can do this, so go look at some originals and copy whatever you want. The first one is you can just do a row of stitches from the top all the way down through. And you do see that sometimes. And sometimes it's just some stitching. It's worked from the back. So we'll sort of do, I guess both here. We'll show it to you. The main idea though is that we just want those anchored down. But do keep in mind that they will receive a fair amount of stress. It is an area that you handle quite a bit. So whatever technique you end up choosing, make sure it's a strong one. So this first technique I'm going to show you tends to be the one that I like to use. It's strong enough and it's easy. So I work from the back. And I basically do sort of a double whip stitch, right? Like I move forward, I take a stitch, and then I take a stitch in the same hole again. You see it kind of makes an X. Then I move forward, I take a stitch, and then I take a stitch in the same spot again. Then I move forward and I take a stitch. And I take a stitch again, and you can see it's making this sort of like X-shaped stitch. That's pretty strong, and I like it because that's it, we're done. It's pretty quick. So there you go. So that's done. You can see the tabs anchored. Okay. Now the alternative here would be find where the edge is. It's gonna be along there. And you could do like a stab stitch, sort of like we did on the waistband to hold down that little guard tab. Bring the needle up, bring the needle back down. Bring the needle up, bring the needle back down. Bring the needle up and back down. Also entirely reasonable for you to do both of these things together, like I just demonstrated. And these things will absolutely never come apart. I am not going to show you the stab stitch again on the front panel because I think you understand how it works. And you can see, frankly, it just takes a while to do. which is not a problem if you're actually making, but it's sort of a waste of time in this video. And then, you know, knot it off on the back. And now you can definitely see that that thing is not going anywhere, right? But you still have the ability to move this up to play with the buckle. So we just got to do the same thing onto the front, right? Make sure it's all sitting how we want, and just get it anchored down. That's it. So now that's anchored down also, not going anywhere. So as you might imagine, give it one more press. Melt the wax and everything from the thread. Get everything all nice and nice. And that's it, folks. That's our knee bands, right? So if we put these things together like they were actually sewn together, right? They should overlap. You know, something like this. We'll go pin it up. All right, they should be shaped something like that. This would have our buckle, which should be more or less in line with our buttons, which would be along here, and then this would lace through the buckle. And that's it. That's the back. That's the front where the knee is, right there. Now, one thing I like to do with the knee is I will take the ham and I'll put the pocket, right? We have the pocket we put in there. I'll put that pocket over the ham like that, and I'll actually kind of press that shape in a bit. Just more or less kind of tree shape it a bit. Don't go crazy with it, but let's get steamed up a little bit and get it. You see that? You see, I'll put some shape in. I like to do that. Now it's going to happen naturally from wear anyways, right? I just really like to help get some of that shape in there. So basically it's just a little bit of stretching. No idea whether or not anything was done like that historically. I guess no reason it couldn't have been. But also nothing to indicate that it did. Now, along the front here, let's talk about the knee band real quick. Before you go through the whole process of sewing all of this, like I've just shown you, it would be prudent for you to baste the whole knee band together and to try it on. Make sure that you have enough tab at the front to lace through the buckle. Make sure your buckle is going to be sitting at the right place, you know. So, you know, you may want to leave yourself a little bit of extra to play with here. But also this pocket, if you need a little bit more pocket, let's say, than the basic instruction I gave you here, it's pretty simple. You just move the knee band sort of over further, right? So basically we measured this right on the straight and it was 5.5. And that was shorter than the curve itself was, right? So it made it a little pocket. Well, if you want more pocket, reduce that to, say, like 5.25 or 5 inches, right? You just pull the knee band over more, and then there's more of the pocket that will have to get made. There's a limit to that, of course, but you may find it fits better that way. Now there are options of other stitchings that can be done here. Some breeches have a row of stitching that goes all the way across the middle of the knee band. Some have stitching at the top and the bottom. Some have all three. Just go look at originals, and see what's out there, and do whatever you want from there. But this is the basic stuff that you will have to do for these to be successful. So that knee band's on there pretty good, right? It's sewn with the back stitch. It's sewn with that prick stitch. It's also sewn with that whip stitch. It's not going anywhere. So that's it, folks. That's our instruction on how to do the lower legs, and that should be all that you need to finish the breeches up. I hope you have success with it, and as usual, I am available for any questions that you may have, or bits of confusion that you may encounter. So by all means, please feel free to reach out. And once again, I appreciate all of you attending the workshop, and I hope you all got out of it what you were hoping to. As for me, I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off, and I'm going to get back to my usual work. Take care and be well.